Thank you. I originally illustrated my Pecha Kucha, but saved over it in classic academic style, so I lost it. So here's the one I have now. So we're talking about partnerships for the goals, and the idea of this SDG is really about cooperation. And I always like to start by asking the question, why? Why is it so obvious that cooperation is necessary? Well, three quick reasons. The first is we're talking about environmental degradation in many of these goals, and the environment has no idea of borders. It wasn't created with borders in mind. Economic activity also transcends borders. There's a lot of openness in our economies nowadays. And also, intrinsically, as human beings, we care beyond the boundaries of our nation's borders. So our ethic extends beyond the borders of our country, often beyond the borders of our community. And so those are my three quick reasons why cooperation merits consideration. Now, the good news is that the world is more connected than it has been ever before. In a lot of ways, this is thanks to the internet. 30% of the youth in the world are now digital natives. That means that they would have spent 5 years at least online while they're still youth. The internet use has doubled also in Africa in the past 4 years. And in more good news, if my Pecha Kucha will go forward, so has the extent of overseas development assistance increased. In fact, overseas development assistance has been on the rise, increasing by 66% over the past 4 years and increasing to 135 billion by 2014. Of course, these are happy figures, but we also know that there is bad news, and as Mary Grace pointed out, conflict has increased, and as the 16 speakers before me have pointed out, the challenges have by no means been extinguished. So while there is progress, there's also increasing challenges. So where do we want cooperation? Well, the SDG speaks mainly of cooperation between North-South and South-South, so it's really about partnerships between countries and among countries. But we can also imagine that there is a role for partnerships within countries, between government and the private sector, for example. Key way to get cooperation is to throw money at it, so we can mobilize or ensure that ODA commitments get honored. We can also mobilize new resources from developed countries, like, for example, private sector resources. But we can also help developing countries to collect better their own taxes and improve investment. Money unlocks infrastructure, it unlocks information, it unlocks better governance. But of course, we all know that if you throw a lot of water into a sink which is blocked, it's still not going to create a flow. So we need to unblock that. And one way to unblock it, to get better outcomes, is through technology and technology transfer. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and yet there's also, in some cases, barriers to people using that good stuff that's out there. 4 billion people still have no access to the internet, and 90% of these are in developing countries. And this links to the need to get the knowledge off the books and into the various countries where it's needed through capacity building. But of course, we know now that capacity building doesn't mean export your knowledge, but take your knowledge to the context and make sure that it is context sensitive. We also have the potential of trade, but we now know that what we want is trade that is fair, that is open, that basically reflects the costs of creation of that material, including the social costs and the environmental costs. And this leads me to the potential of economic policy more generally. Several speakers have talked about this. We need an economy that reflects external costs. We need an economy that does not just rely on faulty market prices. We know that there is market failure. We know how to address market failure, and failure to do so is government failure. This is the result of a week, or maybe two, of a couple of households It is manifest market failure. We know how to address this. It's simply a question of getting out of the textbooks and into policy. We also now know that unlike Mr. Spock here, Dr. Spock, people are not rational information assimilators and actioners. It goes beyond that. People don't simply weigh their costs and benefits before they act. They have a whole bunch of emotions. They are short-sighted. They forget. They are impulsive. They are biased by political preferences. They are myopic. Interestingly, so are governments. Not surprisingly, because they are also made from people. And so therefore, in our attempt to do better at partnerships, we need to remember certain lessons, including that we are dealing with real people here, and including that shortcuts, like, for example, simply measuring how well we're doing through GDP, is perfect, but also perfectly imprecise. Okay, so if we want to measure well-being, we need to go beyond the obvious. We also need to test our policy. We now know that we make mistakes when we make policy, so don't roll it out for the whole country simultaneously. Test, see if it works. Randomized controlled trials are making their way into many policy-making units around the world. We also know that there is potential in treating people like real people and banking on their altruistic motives. It's not just simply about taxing and whipping and incentivizing people. In a sense, it's also about tapping their inner morality. We've heard mention of Laudato Si. This is the new paradigm. This is the tapping of the obvious, the rediscovery of the wheel, that actually people are people, not machines. So basically what this SDG is about is putting people back in the center. It's obvious, perhaps. It's a paradigm shift, but a paradigm shift that is back to stuff that we already know. One way to summarize what this what this SDG is trying to do is to go faster or further. It's about not going faster alone, but going further together.